Okay, great. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much. And I'd like to start by congratulating Charles and his colleagues and those who sponsored this. Having started a business 5 years ago, I know how difficult it is to do anything repetitively, let alone over a long period of time. But what Charles and I and you have on your side is a passion for this topic. This is one of those issues, helping kids get to college, that a lot of people can get passionate about. I've been passionate about it for 30 years, an investment banker, and I'll show you my resume in just a moment. But what I'd really like to be able to do today is make this really interactive. So if you have questions, please, let's start. Can you just practice raising your hand for me? Can everybody just try to do that at least twice during the next 70 minutes. If you can ask me questions, it'll really be interesting, and I really like to get a lot of energy out of what we're doing. So for our warm-up, let me ask you this. If you agree with this statement, raise your hand. All high school graduates should go to college. Yeah, nobody. I don't agree with that either. I started a financial literacy conference earlier this year by saying that, and there were gasps in the audience. And I said that, and the flaw in my title here is how families can plan and finance their college dreams. The problem is that the dream can become a nightmare for kids when they're not properly motivated. So the assumption in my discussion today is that we're talking about the kids who are actually properly motivated to go to college. And I think that's a huge part of it. Because you know, when you think about the horror stories that we read about in the press about kids with huge amounts of debt and they're having issues, almost a third of them didn't complete. So they're having huge issues. So they owe money and they don't have a degree. They're 0 for 2 by the time they're 22. So that's a real problem. So what we're trying to do is address that problem in a way that makes a lot of sense. And what I mean by that, let me just tell you a little bit about my background so you understand sort of what my frame of reference is as we're talking through this. I was a Boston University graduate in 1982. I went to Washington and worked for a congressman for 2 years. And then I, of all things, became an investment banker. That was back when that was noble. I could actually tell my mother what I did. She was proud of me. Not so much these days with some investment bankers, but that's what I did. But from 1987 until 2003, I focused almost exclusively on education finance, loan programs and the like. Then I became the chief financial officer at First Marblehead Corporation. Please come in. First Marblehead Corporation, which some of you might know is a Boston-based company, publicly traded Boston-based company. We did private credit student loans. We were at the height of the growth and helped lead the decline, unfortunately, in that whole area. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. Now people tell me I'm an entrepreneur. I'm actually doing what I love to do, which is to help people plan and pay for college. But this company that I started, Invite Education, is really meant to do that. Has anyone heard of Invite Education, by the way? Anyone? You have? All right. I'm told I give 3 books away, so you get the first book. Congratulations. Thank you. If you'll pass that down. Invite Education, we started 5 years ago to try and help families plan and pay for college better. The other points here I want to do, I was on a school board, I was a private school trustee, so I've been involved in education quite a lot. I helped start a not-for-profit in New York City. But my greatest credential to be here today is that I'm the father of 2 high school graduates. So we've been through the process. So the sort of combination of my professional experience and my personal experience brought me here today to talk a little bit about planning and paying for college. On the book, this book was published in June this year, and it's meant to really help families demystify the process of planning and paying for college. We have a book out there, and if you don't tell Amazon or Barnes & Noble, we'll be glad to sell it for $10 here. Amazon's charging $11.50, and Barnes & Noble is a little over $16. So the point of this, though, is that what I learned as a professional and as a parent, and what Mark talked about, really converged, and that is there's a lot of information out there, and not all of it's really good. You can Google, you can search, use the internet, and many times it only brings more confusion than less. So we wanted to write this plain English guide literally from parents with kids who are babies right through 12th grade, because I think part of the answer to this whole question about excessive debt and making a good college plan is starting with a foundation very early in life. And we'll talk some more about that later on. So what I want to do now is just ask you all a question. I'm here to talk about planning and paying for college. What were you hoping to get out of this session? Is there anything in particular, topics or issues that you would really like to have me talk about during the course of the presentation? Anyone? Yes?
Well, I like that you mentioned that it is a foundation, but there's a lot of families, I work in Minna High School, and there's a lot of families that don't have that foundation. So maybe if there was one part we could discuss how to help maybe junior and senior families who didn't have that foundation, the best ways we can direct them to help with their immediate concerns.
Great. If we move along and I don't get there properly, then just ask. And you get the second book for asking the first question. So thank you very much. Thank you. That's great. Anyone else? Anyone else? Okay. So what I want to talk a little bit about is a context of, we talked about the college dream, but what is that dream? How can we, as professionals in this field, help families, and particularly students, put context around what that dream means for them individually? The other thing I'd like to talk about is how are families doing? When I read the press, I get very depressed because I hear all these horror stories all day long of the liberal arts major that has $150,000 in debt and they're crying because the lenders forced this upon them. Or they've had these horrible circumstances in their life and they just can't make it. That's what we read about. So it depresses me, and I really want to talk about how families just across the spectrum are doing. Also, I'd like to talk a little bit about why all this anxiety. Why is it that we have children, we watch them grow up, and then they become juniors, and somehow we're surprised that they're going to go to college in 2 years from now. And then I'm sure Charles sees this all the time. Advisors see this all the time. The panic just takes over, and they are overwhelmed. And I have to admit, despite my professional experience, it happened in our house. All of a sudden we woke up and my wife said to me, guess what? She has to start taking the test now. I said, oh yeah, that's right. And so we were a little surprised as well. And I'm sad to say that was true. And then the last part, where I hope we can have a real good discussion around this part, is really what can we do together to try to start talking about this in a real way that's meaningful for parents. So what is the dream is really the first question. And so when you're talking to students, can some of you maybe share just one or two anecdotes of how students are dreaming about college right now? How do they think about it? What are you hearing?
From our perspective as an advisor, we talk with families at their homes about what their kids are expecting, and they're going very much for brand rather than substance. Seeing a lot of high-end schools, a lot of choice driven by what they see on MTV and what their friends are talking about in the hallway, and the experience that they imagine for themselves with the ivy growing up the sides of the building and that whole classical picture
the dream,
rather than what might be a substantial, value-based education.
A value-based education, yes.
To piggyback off that, I find it extremely not terrifying, kind of terrifying, that the kids will come in and they will have a planning with the family, and we'll start with the junior year, and then come senior year, the students who are exploring colleges come back with this list that they're ready to apply to, and the parents are like, can I just have 5 minutes of your time after the student leaves? And the student leaves, the meeting, and they're like, we can't pay for that. And I'm like, why haven't you told your child that yet? It's like parents are fearful to not be able to provide for their children, but don't have those open conversations at home. So it's like we're also counseling parents to have very candid discussions earlier then.
That's great, and the subtitle of our book is The Parents' Step-by-Step Guide. We want to talk to parents about this because there's a lot going on in those years, right? Just emotionally in the house. The kids separating, if it's the first one, there's all that anxiety about the kids trying to stand on their own. They're going to make a huge decision, probably their first real adult decision, hopefully, one of the first adult decisions. And so there's all that anxiety. So there's all this sort of underlying thing going on. And then we're talking about probably the biggest financial commitment the family's going to make outside of buying a house potentially. And it's going to happen right there. So yeah, that's good. Anybody else have any other observations? When we think about it, and the way I think about it, it's not a complicated process. We like to boil it down and say, in 12th grade, there are only 2 questions the family has to answer. Can the child get into the college they want? And then secondly, can we afford it? And I think that's where the fear comes. As a parent, you want, and you say all along, I want to give the very best I can to my child. That's the natural instinct. Some will go over the top and say, even if it imperils my retirement, I may be willing to do that. When we talk about it, we say, yeah, but you can't borrow for your retirement, and you don't know how your kid's education is going to work out, so that might not be the best strategy. But when it comes down to it, all the emotion aside and the rest of it, those are really the 2 questions that need to be focused on. Does anyone disagree with that? Do you think there's any other high-level issue? So those are the 2. Then, this is a question, and I'd like to ask you, with a show of hands, the choices will be, what's more important, a good academic social fit, an affordable college, or C, they're equally important. So who thinks that the most important is the academic social fit? 1, 2, 3. How about, is that, you're in? Okay, 4. Thank you. Who thinks that having an affordable college is the most important? And then who thinks they're equally important? Yeah, I ask this all the time, and there's obviously no right answer, but just that very idea of introducing affordability into the equation seems to be new. To promote the book, I've done a bunch of radio shows, and I say that, and these radio hosts are like, oh, that's brilliant, never thought about that. And on one of the shows, there was a professor from a university in the Midwest, and he said, I'm really upset that right now families are starting to think about finances as much as they are about academic fit because they just don't understand the value of just being on this campus. I said, okay, you're an academic, I get it. But affordability is something that's talked about now that wasn't talked about much. How do you know if a particular college is affordable for a family? We're going to talk about that at the end. And then to what Charles got to, and this is what I wanted to really leave with you. What is the dream? Is the dream to attend college, or is the dream to attend the best brand name college? And that's really the emotional angst that a lot of families feel. And I'll say this, since the financial crisis, this equation is starting to change a little bit. I think all of the depths of what we saw have made both parents and the students. Now, let's remember, that's almost 10 years ago now. So the kids are in high school now, kind of lived through that. They saw things happening. And I know that my daughters, they're 22 and 20. My girls don't want a credit card. I had to force my older child to take a credit card. Scared to death of what's going to mean to have a credit card, right? I also made sure that she had some student loans to help her with a credit going lower. But that's a whole, but their generation is really thinking about this, and I think it's really very healthy. And so when we talk about what's the dream, I think, should be to have a college experience that's meaningful and affordable. In the recession write-up, I talked a little bit about Felix Baumgartner. And you might say, why? Does anybody know who he is?
Oh, yeah.
Charles?
High altitude, highest altitude jump, I think.
I was going to award the 3rd book to the person who knew who Felix was, but do you already have a copy?
I do have a copy.
Okay,
I'll defer mine to the next
You'll defer
candidate.
yours, okay. Yeah, so this is Felix Baumgartner, and the reason I tell this is October of 2012. This is when I was thinking about what invite education was going to be, and I read about this guy. And this is what he did. He rode this balloon that was made of material lighter, thinner than an average plastic bag. 24 miles into the stratosphere. The stratosphere is 127,852 feet. He rode it 24 miles up. They said he's claustrophobic, so for him to be in this took a lot of training. So he rides up there, This is the shot, and you can YouTube this, and I encourage you to do it. This is the shot just before he begins to lean forward and fall from the aircraft. It's not actually a craft, it's just a balloon. What did he do? He said, "I'm coming home," and then he started a free fall, 4 minutes, 19 seconds. Anybody guess how fast he was going? Fastest? Any idea?
About the speed of sound.
Yeah, 843.6 miles an hour, Mach 1.25, the first guy ever to break the sound barrier without the aid of a vehicle. Then, to make it a little more dicey, the engineers figured out that he was going to start spinning out of control at some point because of the way the whole air pressure thing worked, which started to happen. You can see him start spinning, but they taught him how to right himself, which he did correctly. Otherwise, we would be talking about him today. So he did all this, and he landed on his feet. I was like, wow. They planned this thing for 2 years. This guy jumped from 24 miles in space. He lands on his feet, and we have trouble getting kids out of college without excessive debt. What is wrong with this equation? And that's literally became a motivation for me to think about why is it that we can plan, Red Bull sponsored this, by the way. They planned this. They planned it for 2 years, and we can't get kids to land on their feet necessarily. So he was a motivation, and I do encourage you. It's the most amazing thing to watch him jump. What I want to talk about next, though, is how are families really doing? And we're going to talk on averages, and as a former banker and CFO, I don't like to talk about averages because nobody's average. But we have to start somewhere. So why don't I talk a little bit about averages? So here and there, by the way, I recognize one thing, and you all know this as well as I do. The data, and you say something and I can give you data on both sides of the argument. So these are all directional, I like to say this, directionally accurate. This is directionally accurate. 20 years of tuition growth, 1995. Private four-year schools were under $15,000 tuition, now they're 40, all in cost, somewhere around 75. Public out-of-states, 20 years ago, a little over maybe $7,000, now a little under 25. And the public in-states now a little less than that. The College Board data, and I like the College Board, in October they release all their data, and we actually have it on our website. But they say the four-year private schools are about $44,000, the publics are about $20,000, but these costs are up about 53% over the last 10 years. Another presentation of this data, which comes from the College Board, is the average estimated undergraduate budgets for 2015 and 16. And again, you can see tuition and fees are obviously the lion's share. But interestingly, some of the biggest growth on a percentage basis is coming in the room and board and the extra fees and all the rest of that. It's a little game that everyone's playing now to try and keep the tuition down, right? So at the end of the day, we all know that colleges have two goals. The first one is to have the greatest net tuition revenue that they can, right? They're a business, they are. And the second goal is to have a well-rounded class. So they use their merit aid money particularly to try and round out those classes, and that's the way it works for them. The other interesting point, let me go to the next slide. The other interesting point, another data point, 94% of parents believe college will impact their ability to save for retirement. And something on the order of 75% of them actually worry more about college than they do about retirement. And I give you those statistics as a frame for this slide. You may know 529 is a section 529 of the IRS code they set up, and the Congress set up in the mid-90s. Section 529 plans to allow families to pay to save for college without any real tax effect. So you put money in, it compounds, and when you take it out, as long as you use it for qualified expense, there's no tax effect there. It's a very robust savings plan for many families. Not for all necessarily, but for many families, average families, it's a pretty good way to save. And you can see from when the plan started in 1996, a little hiccup around the financial crisis, but now over $250 billion worth of savings there. So families are beginning to save more and more in these vehicles. And that's obviously important because there's another statistic which I'll give you, which is, this came from, I think, the Joint Economic Committee. They did a survey and found out that parents overestimate the cost of college by almost 200%. So this is some of this anxiety we're talking about. They see these big sticker price numbers we saw before, and they don't understand that something on the order of 90% of undergraduates get aid. So they don't make that connection. The good news is those that can have been saving, and they're saving at increasing rates. And interestingly to me also is the fact that millennials are big savers. There's another survey, full of surveys, sorry, but the survey results for this are really pretty intriguing. The survey for millennials said that something like 90% of those who had to borrow for their own education plan to take those dollars that they're making on their student loan payment and put it in their child's savings account for college once they're done paying their loans. And they're trying to pay very aggressively. So the savings part of this equation has changed very fundamentally and favorably. Here's this is the news that was posted, you remember last year around this time. 5% of all dollars outstanding under the student loan balances by those 60 and over. It's really kind of scary. I started hearing all those kind of horror stories as well. But as you would imagine, under 30, they have about a third of the debt. Then the 30 to 39-year-olds have the other third of the debt, which is kind of what you'd expect when you have 10 or 15-year repayment programs, sometimes 20-year repayment programs. The next, well, let me point this out. 1,200 billions. That's 1.2 trillion. So that's the other number that we hear in the press all the time, that there's $1.3 trillion of outstanding student loan debt. I always wondered what that looked like. So, luckily for the internet, if you were to take a packet of $100 bills, there are 100 of them, that's $10,000. You might see those in the bank every once in a while. 100 packets of those are $1 million. This is 100 million. So if you take one of those packets and put it on a pallet, this is worth $100 million. This is $1 billion. So this, again, is pretty considerable. Now, we talk about a trillion, it's a whole different deal. A trillion is a million. And to get your arms around that is really pretty significant, staggering when you think about that visualization. And the reason I put this up here is trillion sounds like a big word. When you see it sort of pictorial in a visualization like this, it looks big, but it has the same effect, which is basically to scare you. Right? And I think there's a really good reason for a lot of families to be scared. They don't want to be part of that $1.3 or $1.2 trillion for debt. You hear about kids graduating with $100,000 in debt. Again, what's interesting to me about this is that it's the sound bites that we hear so much about. So what I'd like to do next is maybe just do some of the myth busting and just the facts of what families are actually experiencing right now. Let me ask one more raise your hand kind of question. This is a true-false question. So raise your hand if you think it's true. And the question is, families paid less out of pocket in academic year 2015 than they paid in 2014-2015. So out-of-pocket expenses for the average family last year were less than the year before. Who agrees with that? 3 or 4, 5. It's true. Sally Mae does a really great study every year. What they found that there was slightly reduced outlays last year than the year before. And the reason for that is that the institutional aid budgets have increased. So although states are down and others are down, the institutional aid has actually increased. So there are fewer out-of-pocket expenses, by a little bit, but still fewer. Some of the other facts that I'd like to talk about, I mentioned this one, there's an overestimation of college costs by 200%, indicating obviously that there's not great information in the marketplace about what the actual costs are. 50% of those surveyed overestimated student loan payments by almost 50%. So the same kind of thing, there's just this information, there's a gap in the information of what it's really about. Here's one that's really interesting me. 2/3 of Pell Grants recipients attended public schools, but only 48% actually completed within 6 years. And that's obviously, bless you, that's scary in its own right, but the reality, and we talked about this earlier, I talked to someone outside, when the Pell Grant program started, it covered about 100% of the community college experience, and now it covers about 50%. And a very large proportion of Pell Grant borrowers are now also student loan borrowers. So this is a very significant change in the economics of this. But that is the reality of what it goes on. And this is the underlying statistic as to why there were fewer out-of-pocket expenses last year than the year before. And that's because 34% of the costs were paid from what I like to call free money, the scholarships and grants, up from 30% the year before. So that was a very significant driver and obviously very good for families. Here's another fact that I think people don't know necessarily. It's not out there in the mainstream press. 40% of undergraduates actually borrow nothing, zero, so 60% are borrowing, but 40%, almost half the students, are figuring out a way not to borrow money to go to college, and that's a great thing. The average undergraduate borrows about $18,000. I can show you another statistic that says the average undergraduate borrower borrows $27,500, and then I saw one recently that said $32,000. So I like to think it's in a range of somewhere in the mid-20s is probably, because it depends, like some of these numbers, and you have to be really careful when you parse it. Some of the numbers are for those who borrowed. They borrowed $32,000, and they push it against all undergraduates, whether they borrowed or not, and then it comes down to 17. So again, we talk about averages, it's really difficult, but the statistic that 40% don't have to borrow is not a statistic you see in the mainstream press. You think all students are graduating with hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt if you read the papers. It's just not true. The other side of this that we do hear fairly regularly, so it's a very positive thing, is that it does pay to go to college. College graduates make more. 25 to 34-year-olds with bachelor's degrees earn about $20,000 more a year and about $1 million over their lifetime as that begins to accelerate and they move up. So these are really important opportunities. Also, if you look at the numbers, high school grads, associate degree grads, bachelors, and then doctors, the income line, as you imagine, goes sort of straight up. So education does pay. The other thing that I want to talk a little bit about is just the reality around loans. And I spent my career in the loan business, so I know the good, the bad, and the ugly of loans. The good news is that most defaults are under $10,000. It's also the bad news. The high balance loans are not the ones that the bankers are worried about. The loans that they're worried about, and the federal government should be very worried about, and we know they are worried about it because they're offering forgiveness programs now for this exact cohort. There's the who are borrowing less than $10,000. They may be going to schools that don't have good placement rates, maybe they close, maybe there are issues around that, maybe they're not properly motivated, whatever it is, but they get in and they don't complete. And actually, 35% of all the loan defaulters have borrowed less than $5,000. So it's an indication they're going to a semester or two, they're dropping out, or the school's closing, something bad's happened, and now, as I said before, they're 0 for 2, no degree in debt. So this is something, obviously, that some planning, hopefully, could help with. There are about 8 million defaulters out of the 30 million or so borrowers of loans. So again, most families, most kids are paying. Most kids have debt that they can manage. And then, as I say at the bottom here, the majority of students are landing on their feet, but the noisy minority gets all the press. I actually had the pleasure of testifying before Congress on this big issue about dischargeability, whether or not you can discharge private credit student loans. And it played out almost exactly as you'd imagine. I talked about what I thought were the unintended consequences potentially of having dischargeable loans. And then there was a woman sitting next to me who was the aggrieved borrower who told her story, which was really terrible. But the reality was there was a series of unintended consequences in her life that brought her to the point where she just couldn't pay anymore. And her point was, this economic hardship test is really one that's very, very difficult to meet. And obviously there's a societal issue about what we have to do with all that. But the reality for everyone is that most students actually do very well. And there's a rule of thumb out there that we talk about all the time, which says that, what's the question that comes up, what's the proper amount of debt for a student? What's an affordable amount of debt for a particular student? And the answer that we talk about is that the first and most important indicator is that you have to be realistic about how much the student has to borrow. It's not just the first year, it's all 4 years. And sometimes you have to read the fine print on the scholarships and the aid to make sure that it's actually a 4-year award, so you're not all of a sudden surprised in sophomore year or junior year that that aid's not there. So we say the first thing you do is find out what you think the total amount of debt will be. And that total amount of debt should not exceed the first year income of a student, what their projected income might be. And it's, it's right to say, well, how does a high school student know? Well, they don't know what they're actually going to do at the end, but they have a fairly good idea that, they're more interested in art history than they are in engineering. So, if I'm in that end of the spectrum, I might not want to take $60,000 or $70,000 or $100,000 in debt. If I'm an engineer, I can afford to do that. So there are, again, indicators along the way of what could actually be affordable as they're moving forward. The good news on this is that the average undergraduate now, again average, is making somewhere around $50,000 a year. So if they're borrowing 17 to 30 and they're making 50, most of the students are coming out with an amount of debt that's affordable for them. So again, how are families doing? Despite what we read in the newspapers most times, I think most families are actually handling this pretty well. Any questions or comments or observations? Yes, sir.
Can you break down that 40% of the undergraduates who end up borrowing nothing and break it down into, are these upper income, middle, low income? Are they private college graduates? Are they public school
Yeah,
graduates?
who are these families? Yes,
Yeah.
I haven't seen any data, and I can't tell you other than what probably your intuition is, that there's a good, we're at both ends of the bell curve now, right? So, we're sort of in there. There's some of the families just writing checks. There are some families on the other end that are getting full aid. And then there are what I'll call the sort of normal average family, where they've figured out how to piece it together. So they get a little aid, they have a little current income. Maybe the student's taken a gap year in advance and said, I'm going to go earn some money before I go and start school. But they've kind of figured it out. And they've also, and I'm going to get to this at the end, but they've also taken it upon themselves to choose a school that they maybe didn't have to reach for, right, economically. So they said, I'll go through this at the end, but I think there's a pretty easy equation that doesn't involve any money talk to try to get families to that point where they don't have to take a loan. And then part of that is what we said before. Is it the brand name school or is it another school? Any other questions or observations? So the next question is, why all the anxiety? And I think we heard this before a little bit, that there's a number of reasons why families can get to be very anxious about this. And part of it, for me, is at a high level of just the information that's available. So let me show you precisely what I mean by this. This was the 2016-17, just the guide index for the FAFSA. So if I went up and I was a family, I wanted to choose, so what's this thing about this FAFSA? And I found the guide. There's the first page, and there's the second page. It's 98 pages later. The most important document that I have to deal with, and it's 98 pages just to get to the guide. So why am I anxious? Well, I've been reading the newspaper and everyone tells me that my kid's going to have to take on a lot of debt. So I figure out that this FAFSA thing is really important, so I go up and this is potentially what I find. So I do this as a drum roll into what I think part of the solution is. So let me just ask you, outside of what we talked about, families are surprised, they're worried they don't have the finances. Here's somewhat of a demonstration, and I thought that Mark said it right this morning. when he said that you go to the internet and you don't get the answers. You go to the internet now and you get a lot of stuff. And part of the problem that we saw that families have is they don't know what they're getting. Are they getting something that's good? Are they getting something that's old? There's a lot of information that was good 2 years ago and it's still coming up. So what are they getting? They don't have a sense necessarily of what they can do. And I think that puts pressures on you as guidance counselors to help sort through all of that and provide that kind of information in a meaningful way. So outside of those couple, are there any other issues potentially that make families very anxious? Anxiety producing?
A lot of our students are first-generation students, and so their families haven't gone through this. They may be the oldest child, and there's just a lot of anxiety about how am I going to pay for it. They don't want to take out loans. They've heard, a lot of our families are new to the country. They don't want to take out loans or think they can't get them or don't have the credit, but they want their kids to have the dream.
To have the dream. Yeah, so first generation and then also new international families who are coming. Do they find that there aren't enough services in their native language as well? Is that an issue, or is that not such an issue?
That's part of the issue. We've got a lot of undocumented students as well that it's not a mother or a father that they're with. They came by themselves. They're with an aunt, they're with a grandmother, they're with a family friend. So they don't even know who should fill out the information.
So who in providing that guidance for them and pushing them in the right direction? What I said earlier, I think is part of the anxiety here. And what's interesting, I started in the last year or so to spend a lot more time with foundations, charitable foundations, some of the scholar programs that are around trying to help inner city kids navigate this process. And what comes out of that discussion all the time is this idea that the undocumented students, the first generation students, they're on their own. The families don't really have any context for this. They're not really helpful. Some of them are technology challenged, so they have, they have needs that are beyond what other students have. So they're really challenged to try to get through this process. And that's where the human touch of what you all do, it can't be replaced, or you can't have a computer program help necessarily with this. You really have to find it. And when you hear these success stories, and I was at the National Partnership for Educational Access earlier this year and some others, you hear these success stories of the kids. It's almost because it took superhuman strength for them personally to figure out how to do all this. And these are the kind of stories you hear, and there are no dry eyes in the room at the end, just trying to, how did you ever do this? Sleeping in your car and going to class and doing all this, and they figure out how to do it. But that's not the sort of normal average experience, obviously, but it's a motivating experience, I think, for a lot of folks. And this idea that the information that's out there is jargon-laden is really a problem. And I spent some time in Washington last week, and it's been a while since I was there, and I realized, part of the issue is that we live in the real world, and they all live in the political world. So when you have this conversation with them about policy, and for instance, I brought up two things for them. I said, one, can you please do something in the next reauthorization so that loans don't show up on the financial aid award letter as aid? Right, that would really be helpful. And they kind of looked at each other and chuckled. Nobody wants to talk about that. And the second thing I said is it would really be helpful if you could actually have an APR calculation for federal loans, because you charge fees and nobody else does. And what other lender in the world gets away with having a no APR calculation? And this is, again, all just more information to make it more transparent for families about what's going on. What I want to show you next is, let me get to, oops, going the wrong way. Should be through this. Fast guide. There we go. Okay. I did not want to turn this into a conversation about what our company is, about education, but I did want to show you just two things along the lines of why we are here and what our mission is. So our mission is, when we talk about FAST, so this is what the screen looks like when a family comes on. And what this program does that others don't do, it shows each child individually and the family as a whole. And then it allows the family to look, there's a financial center, a college, scholarships and all, and a calendar. So all in one place. And what we wanted to do, and what we thought the problem in the market was twofold. One, there's not a place where the family can look at the whole family together and each kid individually, right? And that's really, college planning is about a family affair. So I took care of the first kid, but now I look over my shoulder and I have another one or two behind. How do I plan for that whole family experience? So we want to deal with that. But then we also want to deal with this whole information delivery and what's out there. And we call this snackable content. So I showed you the guide and you all seen this, but when we talk about FAFSA, we say, okay, and this is grade specific, so this is for the 12th grade. The 11th graders and others, they get other information, but for the 12th grade, say, okay, this is available on October 1. Okay, that's the first thing you need to know, right? And then you can click here and read more, and when you do that, then we say, okay, here's what you need to file your FAFSA, and by the way, go get your ID, and then go file your form. This direction of just go get your ID, get your form, we didn't see any of that out there anywhere. And it took us literally, like we're going through this, and my partner and I said, wait a minute, it's actually not that complicated, right? I read all this like narrative and all these like, in the guide. I said, well, okay, I go get my ID and I have to file the form. The form itself is complicated, but there wasn't direction around. So we think that having this kind of information presented in a way could make more sense and reduce some of that anxiety. Same thing, so here, more of this idea about snackable content. This is for a first grader. So we say, the reason I bring this up is that part of what we think about is that planning for college doesn't start in sophomore or junior year of high school. It actually starts as soon after the kid is born that the family can put their arms around this idea that if they want that child to go to college, they're better off saving even just a little bit today so that they can have some choices down the road. It's dollar saved is better than a dollar borrowed. So, here for the first grader, okay, today's cost will seem like the good old days by the time that this child gets around to it. So what will college cost in the future? But again, what we want to be able to do is just try to demystify that process. It's why we wrote the book and it's how we set up our process. I'll show you this Family Financial Center, then the Student Financial Center. Then I want to actually get to a question that is sort of the highlight for me of this whole presentation. How many of you actually talk to families about the money and the affordability of college? Some, maybe. So I want to talk about how you can have the money conversation without talking about money. Because I think that that's really the key to this whole thing. And so what I started talking about a little while ago is this idea that every student who wants to go to college should be able to find, and I'll say, maybe I shouldn't say every, I should say most students should be able to find it, and the way they can do that is that the family knows how much they saved. Most times they think it's not nearly enough. Whatever it is, it's known. So you have that. We know what gifts might be coming from grandparents or others, family members, whatever that is. So that's sort of known as well. We also know that there may be some, a lot, a little, no income available for the parents to contribute for each of the next years going forward. And then the same is true for the students, right? So there's some guidance out there that students can work between 10 and 20 hours a week part-time while they're in school and not degrade their academic experience. But maybe there's some way that they can contribute some income. And then you can start to get some idea, there's resources now about how much financial aid, either needs-based aid or merit-based aid, might we be able to get. Needs-based aid is probably a little easier to calculate. The merit-based, you don't know if Trinity College is looking for an oboe player. So if you happen to hit the dice, the lottery that way, that's great. But if not, you'll know. But I say, if you know all this free money, and that's greater than the cost of the college, then it's affordable. Right? You don't have to know anything more about the family's finances than to tell them that. That's affordable for your family. Now, you begin to start to narrow the funnel and say, you can do this at a high level, and maybe say, you know what, it might be very dependent on this, but at least know that point earlier. Know this in the beginning of junior year. Don't know this when the acceptance letter shows up, and the kid's all excited, I got in. And then you say, oh no, but we can't afford it. So know that going in and say, you know what, and have that conversation with the child. You know what, if we get the right amount of financial aid, that school might be affordable for us. But let's have a little spectrum. So here are the schools that we can absolutely afford, here are the schools that are kind of a push, and here are the ones that we need to hit a home run on the financial aid to actually make it affordable. So again, I think that you can talk about the money question with families without talking about the money. The last part of this is where obviously families start to get into more difficulty. What happens when the free money is less than the cost of a college? And then they have to start to think about what loan programs are available. And then it's the same thing that we said before. If total loans, how much for all 4 years, total loans less than expected starting salary, then it's affordable. It'll be okay. And I made this comment not too long ago on an NPR show in Wisconsin, and I said every family has the last controlling variable, and that's the cost of the school, right? There are schools out there, there's the cost. And then the immediate answer, which I was expecting, was, yeah, but that's not the school that they dreamed about. And then I said, in fact, that's where we're starting. Is the dream to go to college and get an education and benefit from that, or is the dream to go to a big brand name school? And if you're going to take the risk of going to a brand name school, at least know you're doing that, right? And my advice, and I think most people's advice, is that sacrificing your retirement is not a good play for college, right? It's not great advice. Because now it reminds me of that when you're on the airplane and they say, you know, if the mask drops down, you take it first and then put it on your baby second. It's sort of counterintuitive. But the whole idea is, you know, you don't want sort of two endangered bodies here. So this is a fairly straightforward, simple paradigm of how you can set up the conversation to have the discussion about affordability without having to say, okay, Mrs. Jones, you know, how much are you making? It's not really all that important, that conversation. And you know, I'd love to know what your reaction is to that, but to me, it's a real service to introduce this concept of families now, so they don't wind up on the front page of the Hartford Courant saying, oh, Sally had a liberal arts degree and now she has $150,000 in debt and she's going to be a defaulter. So what is your reaction to that? Do you agree? Is that something that you think you can have that conversation with, or is that not really possible? Please.
I think what I find difficult is more of the conversation that has to happen with like administration at the schools. You know, and I know I find we get such a push our students into some of these, you know, great, well-known schools that cost a lot of money, and they're not, our administration's not in touch with, I guess maybe morally, what we as counselors can say, I don't know if that's the best decision for this family.
Right.
They maybe should start off at a community college for the first 2 years and then, you know, transfer on or something. So I feel like that is more of a difficult conversation to get the administrators on board.
I think that particularly in private schools where you want those names on your college list, right? You know, it's really important. There's a lot to that. Thank you. Anyone else? Yes.
There's also a stigma in the parent community that if your kid doesn't get into the good school, then you did something wrong as a parent.
Right.
And it's hard to break that down and really educate them about, well, make good choices for your child. Because they push their children to do all these activities and sports and clubs and activities because there's going to be scholarships for their child.
That's right.
That aren't there. And I just feel bad for them sometimes because you can't get through to them.
No, that's right. It's the keeping up with the Joneses. You know, there's a cocktail party talk or whatever it is. You know, in some communities that's obviously, you know, very important. But I was asked a question not too long ago. I said, well, so what is what are the two greatest? What's the greatest myth? And I said, well, the great myth is around financial aid. So parents are either too optimistic or too pessimistic about how much financial aid they're going to get. So if they make a lot of money, they think there's no way I'm going to get any financial aid, which is not true because it's merit money. And again, they might want an oboe player or I'll tell you, my daughter, we're from Massachusetts. She's at DePaul in Indianapolis, and they were looking for a girl from New England. You know, same thing. She was applied to Trinity College in San Antonio, and they both gave her merit money. And I'm convinced it's because they wanted a geographic diversity in their class. You know, and so that's great. You know, that's terrific. Also, on the other side, parents are way too optimistic about just how good their kid's arm is, or their daughter's a great volleyball player, and this is going to be the answer. That's like desperation Hail Mary kind of pass, and that doesn't work so well most times. So anyway, I think it is important to, I guess the concluding comment I'll make, and we talked about it here, it's just to be realistic, right? You know, optimism and pessimism is okay, but realism is going to keep the family grounded. It's going to keep the kids in a place where they can land on their feet when they graduate from college. And you know, when I talk about what does that mean, to me, a successful college graduate is one that walks out with a diploma, hopefully in 4 years. Where they walk out with a diploma, they have a job that will cover an affordable amount of debt if they have to take debt, right? And that kind of puts them in a position then where they can be successful. So the question that I asked about that Felix Baumgartner thing, it says, you know, he landed on his feet, do your students? And I think that's the end of the day what we're all trying to do. We're trying to create this environment for students and families to be successful. So are there any other questions? I know that we're out of time. I do have one other last housekeeping item. You asked the last question, so you get the last book. Also, we are, as I said, we're sold the books there. If you're interested in flipping through them, we have them inside. Thank you so much for your time. I enjoyed being here today. Charles, thank you for the invitation.